grab your toolbox. I want to cut off his eyelids.
His eyelids?
I want to watch him suffer. Come on.
I thought you wanted me to shoot him after he was done digging the hole.
Changed my mind.
Change his mind.
She tell you how big your cock is? Huh, Jeff?
What a start. Hey, folks, let's talk about the show that is Barry, Season 3. And as I explained in these overall reviews, kind of retrospective slash essay slash breakdown of. Hey, what's up, Christine? Glad to see you guys. Welcome to a super long live stream essay video breakdown of HBO, to me, one of the most definitive shows they recently made, called Barry. And we are in the Season 3 retrospective. And I'm going to give a little bit of a background of why I subtitle these the way I do, which I did in the first 2 videos, and then how each of these seasons is going to directly connect to the subtitles that I have, which are the overall theme or arching theme of the season, which is forgiveness and consequences. Why is it named this? Well, the very first episode of the season is called Forgiving Jeff. Now, Jeff is not an important character. Jeff never comes back in the show. But Jeff is not the idea of the episode. The idea is forgiveness. Can somebody be forgiven for truly horrendous shit that they do? Has been, I would say, a running theme in this show is Barry trying to get this ideal life away from being a hitman, being a movie star, and trying to be forgiven by moving past what he is and evolving into something new. And this season, more than any, highlights the themes of forgiveness, but not only forgiveness, because there's a second part to my subtitle, which is the consequences of your actions. And there is a running theme about people forgiving people, even though they do terrible things, but also the consequences behind the action. And I think this first episode clearly sets up what the ending of this season is going to be, and that crazy ending. And I'd say that, first off, this season's a 10 out of 10 for me. It's probably my favorite season in all of Barry besides the final, and we'll get to that. But people always say they don't like the last season of the show because it got super dark. But I would argue this is the season that really gets dark. Even though there's comedic moments, and I'll highlight them as I go through the episodes, there's still an underlying melancholy and sense of dread. As when this season came out, it was announced that they were going into their final and setting people up, and you really feel it in this season for the finale of Barry. Now, I said something in the second season where I said Barry isn't actually a show about Barry. It's a show about Barry, yes, and he is the title character. His name is in the title. But the show is not about Barry at all. The show is about the things Barry does and the destruction he leaves in these secondary characters' life. Barry is kind of a metaphor for the rest of the show. What I mean by that is the nature of violence, which we've been exploring in the destruction we leave with the choices that we make. Barry is a vehicle for other themes. And while, yes, I'll get to his resolution when I get to the end of the series, this show starts switching focus on a lot of characters that up to this point I maybe touched on, gave a couple of moments to, but I hadn't really dived into, because this is the season where more characters get more screen time. And actually, the secondary characters, I'd say, are more heavily focused on, as opposed to Barry. I mean, he's there, he's in the background, he's doing things, he's still the driving force, but he's no longer the focus of the show. The show is now focused on the actions that Barry put forth in the first 2 seasons and the effects that they're starting to have on the people around him. The destruction. Oh, excuse me. This beef teriyaki is delicious. So anyways, It is the domino effect of stuff Barry started, but we're now getting it through the eyes of the people around him. And this season does a great job in showing the rise and decline of everybody in Barry's inner circle. By wanting to change who he is and try to distance himself, he's actually drawn in everybody into this web of lies and deceit, which has spread outward and is slowly infecting all of the relationships around him. And try as he might, by him changing, and I've said this before, every time something happens bad to Barry, it actually makes the secondary characters' lives better. Now, why is that? And I'll get to that at the end of the whole entire show, the final season, because I think you really start to see the answer to these questions. But for right now, you can kind of get a gist of everyone's life's getting better. So let me just recap season 2 a bit, just so we can get a little bit of a refresher where everybody is. Gene has been threatened by Fuches, and he just found out he has the post-traumatic stress from everything that's happened in the last season. But remember, at the ending, he finally remembered what Fuches told him, which was Barry did this. And it starts off with Gene wanting to get Barry caught for all of the shit he's done for the first 2 seasons. And nobody listening to him because Barry is very unassuming right up until the final. So it's Gene finally seeing behind Barry's mask and realizing everything that's been said in the show, everything he's turned a blind eye to, was all a clue to who Barry actually is. And that all this horrible shit that's been happening to Gene has actually been a result of Barry being in his life. And he starts to put those pieces together. We've got Sally, who's taken a more prominent role. Remember, she had the subplot of when she was abused and taking that energy and making it into the final act of the play, which was the big finale in season 2, as well, running side by side with Barry's story. And in that one, hey, Lemon Pie, welcome. Welcome back to my season 3 retrospective breakdown. It's going to be a long one, so sit back. I'm just recapping all of my points for season 2 before we move on to 3. So, Sally has become famous. She has taken her tragedy, which she lied about at the end of season 2, which is a great statement on Hollywood. And don't worry, the Hollywood angle will swing back around later in this season and way later at the end of the show, which is a brilliant commentary on Hollywood, on how they represent things, how they twist things around, our perceptions, people's perceptions. We'll get there when I get to season 4. But season 3 is starting to hone in on those points. So she has this play that she's working out called Josephine, which is loosely based on her abusive experience that is becoming big. And that's really catching on. And I'm going to touch a lot on Sally's plot thread because it's super important to the end. So this is going to be a really long review because I really now got to focus on characters. Like I said, they weren't important in the first season. They were kind of important in the second season, but the third and fourth season is where they take center stage and become a huge piece in this overall story, which, just to pause it for a second, this is some of the most brilliant writing, and really Bill Hader is totally underrated. He's got such writing chops, and I really would like to see him do more projects. But anyways, that isn't the point. Let's get back. They start to focus on these threads, and now Sally and Barry are living together and dating each other. And now we're to the titular character, right? The main focus of the show, Barry himself. And I gotta say, season 2 has my favorite finale. The playing around with light and the darkness, the symbolism that he was in the light, and then after he killed all of the Czechoslovakians, he slinked back into the darkness, symbolizing that he's lost that piece of himself. So when we kick this off, we actually start off with him and that little clip that I played in the beginning where he is taking jobs off of Craigslist once again, because without Fuches, he doesn't have his connections to the underground, and so he's being quite reckless. And that will kick us off into the breakdown of episode 1, Forgiving Jeff, which I would say is the most pivotal, and Jeff is an important character, but not for the reasons you think. Jeff is just some random dude who dies. But that is not the importance of Jeff. The importance of Jeff and the importance of the title itself, Forgiving Jeff, sets up the whole arc, the whole theme of this season, which is forgiveness, and this quest that Barry's character goes on to be forgiven for the shit that he's done, and to make it up to Gene, who now knows who he is and what he's done, and in his twisted mind, this person who's like a father figure to him, he wants to repair that relationship. Meanwhile, Fuchs is on his own journey of self-discovery to get back his pupil, this person he sees as a son to him, that he's taken care of, to make up for the shitty things he did in season 2 by selling or by trying to have him murdered and all this other stuff. So these characters are all going on their separate journeys, and it's all going to collide and make for a funny, tragic, this is to me the definition of a black comedy, and in some sense a Greek tragedy, especially when you get to the ending, and why I like the end of this show so fucking much, because everything is not just done to be done. You could see the seeds of where they were going started to be planted, and very firmly in this season is where you really start to see the show shifting to a darker tone, and where they're starting to take these characters, because I don't imagine what people had in their mind when they first watched this show, but this is spoilers in case you don't know. This is not going to end well. I mean, just based off of what I've been telling you guys, this is not going to end well, and very few people in this story are going to get a quote unquote happy ending or a version of happiness that you can get in this bleak, dark world. So you could start to see the seeds of these things being laid down in this season, which makes it so brilliant and one of my favorite seasons in this whole entire series. So let's break down Forgiving Kevin, episode 1 of season 3. It starts with Barry being depressed, returning to killing on the internet, while still auditioning for acting gigs as well. During the first job, which I showed you, he he sees his client forgive his target that he's supposed to kill for sleeping with his wife. Barry, in a fit of rage, shoots them both and buries both the bodies. Now, this I want to stop on for 1 second, and I'm going to be doing this a lot, so this is going to be a long ass review. But this right here shows Barry doesn't believe in the concept of being forgiven, or that somebody can be forgiven, which is displays it portrays why he's gone back to being depressed and why he's gone back to violence, because when he can't reconcile with things he's done, he falls back to his old patterns in order to get a sense of security. And seeing this target, this person who wanted to rip this dude's eyes out and basically hired a killer to kill him, forgive somebody, doesn't register with Barry. But this does play a huge impact on what happens to him later in this episode, and starts to sow the seeds in Barry's mind of maybe forgiveness is the key. Maybe I can be forgiven. If a guy can forgive another guy for sleeping with his wife, maybe my mentor can forgive me for killing the love of his life. What he doesn't realize is these are two very different things. These are two very different scenarios. But because of Barry's comfortableness with violence, he can't compute the intricacies and the depth of the actions he's taken, the basic destruction that he's left, the ripple effect that he's left out into the world by this one action. He's caused the police to go after the Czechoslovakians. His teacher went into a fit of depression. He's affected people in his class, but none of this stuff is registered to him because violence is normal. And that's also a theme for the audience. If you start to sit and watch this, and you watch the show carefully, it's also a critique on our comfortableness with violence. It's why the show's violence is portrayed the way it's portrayed. And I've said this in a couple of the breakdowns, and I'll continue because it's a very important point. We are Barry. And I'll get back to that when we get to season 4. But we are Barry. We don't understand. And I think what gets the audience about this or confuses them is that I don't think people realize not only is Barry his own character and separate from the audience, but he literally is the embodiment of the audience watching this show right now, right? And I'll get to where they start to flesh this point out more as you go along, especially one episode in particular that I'm going to highlight. But it's the idea of Barry can't understand, and in certain points, we want Barry to be forgiven, but we shouldn't, because Barry's done some fucking terrible shit up to this point. But people, if you ask them and talk to them up to this point in the show, are sympathetic towards Barry, and that's the point, because you can't write an unsympathetic character. Nobody wants to follow that. You got to have him have layers and have depths and have flaws, and people so deeply connect with the character that we can look past their most atrocious things. Look at Tony Soprano. For years, people forgave Tony Soprano. We all knew he was evil, but part of us wanted him to get better. Part of us wanted to see him grow, and we kind of did through the series, see him make different choices until you get up to the end and you realize he is just evil. He's just a gangster. That's all he's going to be. This therapy has not been changing him. He's just been using it to be a better gangster at the end of the day. And the same kind of applies with Barry. No matter how hard he tries, the only way to change is two things. Either he admits what he's done and he goes to jail, or he continues his charade and just continues killing anybody who gets close. These are the only two options at this point. I've pointed out in my other reviews where he's had a point to get off the train and he chose not to. He chose the wrong decision. So at that point, all you have available to you is more bad options as they just keep on stacking on each other. So let's get back to my favorite character. I already said Sally is doing a semi-autobiographical TV series, Joplin, which is doing well. Hank is questioned. NoHo Hank, our favorite little Czech villain, has now become a major player, or second in command, since the end of the season when he came in and everybody was dead, and the bosses now think he was the one who put out the hit, which hilarity and shenanigans will ensue. And like I said, no Hank is the comic relief till about we get to the end of the season, and that's where everybody turns dark and most of the comedy is drained. But he has his funny moments, and Hank is now setting up Fuches, who they have shepherded away for safety, but they're leading the investigation away from Barry to Fuches as the culprit, and they frame him as a high-level Czechoslovakian assassin. The police believe Barry's alibi and are unable to identify Fuches's real identity, accept Hank's statement and relay it to Jean. Jean, who knows the truth, refuses to believe that Barry is blameless, and in his heart, just his eyes are open now. He sees Barry for who he is. Now Hank and Crystal Ball are together. Yes, it's a gay relationship. It's been built up for 2 seasons. I think it's fine. They don't really force anything. You always kind of saw it coming. And to be honest with you, this is a way you put something like that in a very tactful, naturally organic, tasteful way. They do have a couple of scenes that are kind of like, because HBO, they show everything, but it's somehow enduring and very lovable. They're two idiots who really don't belong in the positions. They're terrible gangsters, and it's kind of funny to see them as a couple bungling things up together. And it really becomes a kind of a little bit of light in a very bleak story. So when you cut to them, instead of it being like, oh, we're going to the subplot, you kind of look forward to it because of all the heavy shit that's going on around Barry. It's good to have a little bit of levity, and NoHo Hank and Cristobal are the levity of this season. And it definitely affects what's going to happen later, which is why I'm saying a lot of these secondary characters become primary, because even though Barry's consequences ripple, a lot of the other characters now, based on choices Barry's made and situations he puts them in, have no other choice but to make poor decisions themselves. And it's kind of a snowball effect, and we'll get back to that when I get to the end. So, NoHo Hank and Cristobal are together, and Barry approaches Hank for work, but Hank doesn't want him to do any work. He's very upset, and this is where Hank kind of realizes and starts to see the kind of person Barry is. He's very selfish. He's very about himself, and he points this out. And he's like, "You destroyed my or organization. You tried to frame me, and yeah, it all worked out, but." Dude, you're selfish, and like I got my own shit going on, and basically turns him away, which in a weird way is what Barry needs. Barry doesn't need a crutch. This is another junction where Barry needs to grow himself. He needs to become his own sort of character, and he needs to not depend on others. He needs to become self sufficient. And it all goes back to seasons 1 and 2, right? People always using him not making his own decisions. This is really a test on whether Barry, who's in this super dark place, can pull himself out. And we shall get to what he decides is the way he's going to pull himself back from this abyss he's thrown himself into. Uh, so Gene and Barry decide to meet up, and Barry's overjoyed. He thinks this is where Gene is going to see him for who he is. They have two very different ideas. And this is going to be important for the final season, which I didn't realize until watching the show again and how this comes up, but a very oddly, specifically important part. Gene was given this gun for this show that he said, and it's not a prop, it's an actual functioning gun, but it's disassembled. You reassemble it though and put the firing pin back in, it could legitimately fire. And so he takes that gun and he invites Barry over, seeing that the police won't do anything about this man. Nobody will. He lost the love of his life. He's sitting there at his desk, and the theater is shut down thanks to Barry, because even though Barry wasn't directly involved in it, by Sally becoming famous and kind of overshadowing the theater, and Kusino coming to the realization he did, the theater's closed down, and it's Kusino's life's work. Kusino now has nothing. He has, in quite literally, lost everything. He's lost his acting class. He's lost the love of his life. In some senses, he's lost his will to live because there's nothing left to drive him. And this is going to be a very important theme for all of the characters, and especially Gene's growth and de-evolution in a sense, because he does evolve and then he devolves, which is much a mirror to Barry. So Gene and Barry are kind of really connected strongly in the show, because Gene and Barry both make decisions that dramatically cement where they're going to be at the end of it all. So Gene invites Barry, and and this is where I say the show still has its humor in the beginning of this season, but as it goes along, it gets super fucking dark, and you could see this is the turn they were always going into. But he goes to shoot him, and fucking the gun falls apart, and it's a hilarious scene. And Barry, of course, has no choice but to, you know, bang his head against the guy and take him hostage. And Barry takes him out to where Jeff was. And he remembers everything playing back in his head, and how Jeff was forgiven by this guy who was going to kill him. And the light bulb goes off in his head. because Gene looks at him and he goes, I just want to be forgiven, blah, blah, blah. Some great acting, by the way, great fucking dialogue. And Gene says, earn it. And that's where the light goes on, and he goes, okay, I will. He goes, we could call it even if I can get you an acting job and get you back where you were. Now, I've got so many feelings on this where it's like you could definitely tell there's a humorous vibe to this whole thing, but it's such a wacky yet kind of sensible thing to assume if you're Barry, right? He killed someone, so to balance the scales, Gene's career is virtually dead. If he brings it back, they're even. Even Steven. Everything's square in his mind. He doesn't realize the depths he has destroyed this man's life. And that's the hilarity that pretty much dictates these first 3 episodes is Barry's quest to get Gene back into Hollywood. And Gene has done so many shitty things to people. And you start to get a little bit more about Gene Cousineau and what his life was like before he ran this theater. And you start to see that Barry and Gene, on very different levels, but kind of fundamentally the same, have the same issue. People hate them and won't forgive them. And where one you'll start to see get forgiveness again, the other is kind of stuck in this loop because Gene starts taking responsibility for the shitty person he was. And he starts owning his mistakes. And this is going to be a big thing. But where I say consequences, you'll see at the end. And I'll loop it back around to the second point, which is the consequences for your actions. And everybody, including Sally and everyone else, for her lie she told at the end of the second season, are going to have to deal with the ramifications of everything that they've done up until this point of the season. So the first episode ends as Gene pleads for his life and gives this great speech, and Barry then has an idea and slams the trunk. And that's the end of this episode. And this is a great season opener. It's a good way to establish what our themes for the season are going to be. There is still comedy in here. Like I said, it just starts to shift into darkness. It doesn't quite get there until the last couple of episodes and season 4, which is fucking depressing. But there's still some comedy, some levity, like Gene wanting to kill Barry, the gun falling apart. NoHo Hank and Crystal Ball are always fun and lovable to watch. And NoHo Hank make up this ridiculous tale where they call Fuches the Raven, and he's this unknown assassin. There's so many little funny bits that lure you into believing this is going to be a very lighthearted season. But there's also darkness in here too. The very opening shot is chilling with Barry just killing these 2 innocent people essentially. I mean, one guy's not innocent because he hired them, but you get what I mean. Like, they had forgiven each other, but because of Barry's own selfishness, he can't understand forgiveness. And this is now, before I get into the rest of the season, a great chance for Barry to grow, right, as a character. Remember I said in season 2 he stays static. And you'll start to see what I mean as we get through the 3rd and into the 4th season. But Barry does want to change. He does want to do good. And so he again institutes his no killing rule. He's not going to kill again now. And he's got a mission. He's focusing on Gene, getting Gene a role. And he is going to do everything in his power to turn their fortunes around. And that takes us into episode 2, called Lemonade. Now we cut back to Barry and Sally, and Barry's first attempt to get Gene a role is to talk to his girlfriend Sally and try to convince her to cast Gene. And the thing is, this is where you get a sense of who Gene Cousineau is. And apparently, he was a pompous asshole that nobody in Hollywood liked. He's sexist. He spread rumors. He's actually the embodiment of everything wrong with Hollywood, only now it's even kind of a statement to how Hollywood superficially changes. And what I mean by that is that Hollywood thinks by doing all of these things they're changing and blackballing these certain people and ostracizing them, but sometimes it's just a method to get rid of somebody or to push a certain point for profit margins. And this becomes a focal point as far as, remember I said there's also commentary on Hollywood and the media and everything, and this becomes a focal point of perception and popularity, and they even bring up algorithms. I'll get to that episode. But a lot of the Hollywood stuff, like I said, is very reserved to Sally's portion of the story. But also you see it in Gene's story kind of creep in, where Gene has done some disgusting things, but no different than what was going on in his era. The key difference is people just didn't like him. So they used those things he did as ways to blackball him. And so he's in this box. So when when Barry goes to Sally to try to get him a job, she's like, "Look, nobody will touch Gene. He is virtually unhireable. I can't hire him on my show." And this shows you kind of the selfishness of Barry. Now, Barry, instead of focusing on his girlfriend, they're living together now, and the great success she has, he is only solely focused on Jean because he wants forgiveness for himself. And this proves my theory of the selfishness he always has. Now, she has this great show, she has this great opportunity, but he comes in for himself, his own personal favor. And even though it's altruistic in nature, he wants to help his friend Jean, it's still selfish because Sally's going through her own struggles trying to get the show off the ground. And so, if you're really paying attention, you do kind of start to see Barry's traits and what people are saying about him. He is very selfish, he's very self absorbed. He wants to absolve himself, but he doesn't want to listen to other people's problems. He doesn't want to help other people. And because of the stress this has on his mentality, he goes off on her, which is an interesting scene because the co-star of Sally's show starts to see this and realize or say she's in an abusive relationship. Now, I tackled this in season 2 and her whole arc, and I did say Barry is not abusive in the sense of what you would think. I wouldn't even say really emotionally abusive. He's very manipulative, but I would say he does care. He does love her, but because of his lack of understanding of how to show that and his lack of general understanding about anything emotionally towards other people, it's hard for him to express that. And he sees it as a simple thing, where she sees it as much more. And this is the conflict we're going to get into. And this is what I say when I say Barry affects everybody around him, because he truly does. So now he is emotionally putting her in a bad place because he yells at her. And Bill Hader is so great with the way he transforms from kind of looking stressed and manic to this just anger that comes out. And you see it when he does a hit. But now it's bleeding into his everyday life. He's seeing people with targets on their head. He is mentally breaking down because, like I said since season 1, he's never dealt with the underlying issues, which is himself. His kind of nonchalant look at violence, his broken nature, his inability to feel things, his inability to connect with people. Sorry about that, some tech issues. So he's never dealt with his inability to handle the things going on in his life. And that's why he could never be compatible with anybody else. Even though I think their relationship is as healthy as they get for those two, it's still unhealthy because neither of them are dealing with the issues that they have within themselves. So they can't be there for each other if they haven't fixed themselves. So he goes off on her, and uh, hold on, Barry then like storms out and he books an audition with Alyssa Jones, but this is the person from the second season who he walked in and accidentally got a part for, but he couldn't take it because Jean was kidnapped by Fuches. It was a whole thing. But it goes to that same casting director, gets another part, but they still won't help Jean. So Gene has such fucked over so many people that anybody he goes to refuses to help Gene, and it's starting to slowly piss off Barry because he doesn't understand. He's like, "Well, I've forgiven him. Why can't everybody else?" And this is gonna be what I've said in the title: forgiveness and consequences, because there's consequences for your action, and that's the part Barry doesn't understand and that he's not getting, but he will. We'll get there. Anyways, meanwhile, back to the lighthearted, fun-loving Cristobal, NoHo Hank side. Cristobal's father-in-law, Fernando, arrives to LA to organize a raid with the Czechs. Now, I told you there's a love subplot between Cristobal and NoHo Hank and how this plays into their story. Well, due to the actions of the Czechs and pushing into the territory that they have been, and this is the drug gang exciting side that everyone likes, uh, they have incurred the wrath of the Latins because the last season, the Burmese, the Latins, and some of the Czechs were wiped out when Barry went on his Terminator spree and fucking killed everybody. So they want revenge, and they believe the Czechs did it. So Barry, as I said, affects everybody, even these drug gangs and things that he's trying to get out of. His actions at the end of that season and his sole drive to kill Fuchs started a war between the Latin gangs and the Czechoslovakians. And this is all the snowball effect that Barry creates and then just kind of walks away and hopes that it'll work itself out. So Fernando comes to LA. He goes to raid the Czechs' compound, but Cristobal tips off Hank. And Hank gets all of his people out, and in a funny, fucking hilarious scene, he takes all of his thugs and the main guy on a Hollywood tour bus to see all the famous stuff. It's like I said, Cristobal and Hank are really like the comedy for this season when shit gets too heavy. And so it's a funny little scene with the guys coming to kill them and they're not there and they're all pointing out actors and actresses and the main boss is super pissed and doesn't want to be there, but NoHo Hank is his lieutenant, so he kind of steers them away from it. And they're trying to figure out how to have a relationship while these two factions are literally gearing up to kill each other. Cristobal, though, breaks up with Hank. Sad scene. Not gonna lie, I was super invested in it. But he does it to protect Hank because he realizes they're gonna keep on killing him, and unless he goes back with the boss, they're going to stay until either the Czechs are wiped out, or Cristobal takes over everything, or he leaves with them, and they could just send somebody else to start a new operation. So that's kind of where their story's left at. Meanwhile, Sally is forced to move up the premiere of her series by several weeks, which is this I said this is the Hollywood end, right? So the show is going great, and as they do, it's testing well, so they want her to move up her show, but she's not done with it. And this is creating the stress that's between her and Barry and everything else, and this deadline that she has to meet. And they don't want to compete with other series. So um, she has to go on this press junket for the show to promote it. And this is where I'm talking about the statement on Hollywood. It's super hilarious because instead of talking about her series, they start asking her questions about Tom Holland and the new Spider-Man coming out and what she thinks of the Avengers. Because remember, this was around the time that whole thing was going on. So that's the commentary they're putting. But it's just fucking hilarious because they ask her nothing about the show or about her. They do one question about her, and then they start talking about like all of this other stuff and what she thinks about it. And it's kind of a commentary on how, when you go on these talk shows and stuff, they want to know the politics and everything else, but they never ask you about your show. And I thought that was a cool little bit. So that's why I bring it up. So she gets exhausted after that. Barry has his audition and he lands a role for himself. And so he convinces the people to get a part for Gene as an extra. Um, and he's super excited. He thinks Gene's going to be glad, but when he goes back to the car trunk, Gene has escaped. And in one of the fucking funniest sequences, he goes to this bar to ask for help. After running through these two backyards, these dogs all chasing him and stuff. And by the time he asks for help, he looks like a whole homeless person because he hasn't shaved or anything. And he's got all these rips and tears. It's fucking hilarious. Like I said, you could see the humor kind of front loaded because trust me, it gets super fucking dark. So he goes to this bar and he's like, "There's this madman. He's coming after me." And Gene winds up actually going back to his house, but Barry is there. And if you remember in the second season, I brought up that Gene connected with his son Leo. Leo's going to become super important as well. Like I said, a lot of secondary characters become the highlight. So Leo and Gene have a good relationship, and Leo's son is there with him, and he's living with his father. They've patched things up, but Barry's sitting on the couch with them. And this is where you see Barry sort of trying to do the wrong thing as far as wanting forgiveness. You can't force somebody to forgive you. They have to forgive you on their own. And killing their love interest is a pretty fucking tall ask, and probably one thing no one will ever forgive anyone who does that for. But if he does want forgiveness, he's kind of forcing the issue, and he threatens to kill his son and the kid if Gene doesn't go along with him for the audition. He sees this as giving Gene motivation. But as an audience member and someone outside looking in, this is actually pretty fucking dark and actually really super wrong. And we all know this isn't going to lead to anything good, one, but two, it's not the right way to go about these things. And even though Barry is doing this out of what he thinks the best thing is for Gene and how he can be forgiven, once again, it all comes back to his selfishness. He wants to be forgiven. The only way he thinks he can be forgiven is if Gene works again, and it will make everything right. And we all know that's not how that works. So it's kind of where the episode ends, and it's really good, really solid episode. And then we go to episode 3, and this is where we get back to Fuches. This is a hilarious episode. I have no clue why it's titled the way it is. I think it's because he's mentioned, but the name of the episode is Ben Middleston. So the Czechs return to their raided heroin operation. The main guy, Bartar, who premiered at the end of season 2, he is unaware that Crystal Ball aided his escape. So to retaliate against the Bolivians, he wants to put a bomb underneath where Crystal Ball is staying and where he knows the Bolivians are and blow them all up. He's super fucking pissed. But instead, to save, his lover, NoHo Hank decides to go a different route and say, what if instead we bring Fuches back for to the U.S. for assistance, but at this time we've been following Fuches, and Fuches starts by living in this Czech place. When they first show him, he really fucking hates it, and then he meets this woman and he falls in love. So by the time they fucking make this phone call, he's raising goats. He's completely forgotten about everything that's happened, and it's just a fucking, like I said, a lot of the humor that they're trying to do before shit gets super dark. So he's on a goat farm with this beautiful Czechoslovakian girl, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm good. I don't need to come back. Fuck the U.S." and hangs up on him. And so now they basically set him up with no way to really get to him because they made it so secret and so protected that they themselves, you know, couldn't get him back. So Baratar goes with his first idea and buys a bomb, which is another funny scene. And this is what I say where they desensitize the violence, which is super important to the whole plot of the show. But they have this Kaboom app. And oh my God, it's so fucking hilarious because it's how I would imagine a cell phone app for doing a bomb would actually go. It's super fucking funny. And we'll get to that scene, but it's hilarious. So, uh, pretty much running out of choices, Hank goes to Barry and he's like, "Hey, I need you to carry out this assassination because you were working on, Craigslist and shit, and we got an actual job for you." Meanwhile, Sally is still continuing her press tour with her co-star Katie, a young actress who witnessed Barry's outburst, and she is kind of struggling because she's on this show about her life and sees it as she's an abuse victim and doesn't understand why she's with Barry, who comes off, especially in that moment, as kind of an abusive dick. And she tries explaining through the episode that no, it's just the way Barry is, but she comes to a realization that he might have a dark side she's not aware of. So uh, Barry and Gene, they prepare for their role on this series, Laws of Humanity, which is supposed to be like a knockoff of Law and Order. And Gene uh, realizes he inadvertently tipped off Janice about Barry's crime in the cabin. And they talk about this because now that Gene's forced to be with Barry, he's like, "Hey, why did you kill her? I just need to know why." And he goes, "If you want me to forgive you, this is a good step." So he tells the story, and then Gene starts putting it together on his own without Barry really having to say nothing. That when he told uh, Janice about the first time they met in his monologue as a hitman, Janice put it all together. And that's when she went on the computer. That's when she looked up the stuff and realized that Barry was connected to Chris, who was connected to um, all the other people, the military buddies, and that is what ultimately led to her death. And now he is super fucking guilty and kind of super pissed off because he realizes like he might have caused her own death. And even though Barry's telling her or telling him, "No, you didn't," um, it's too late. It's no good. He's got that in his head. So, uh, Gene lashes out at Barry at this point when they're filming a scene, and he punches him in the face and he walks out and storms off. Barry, meanwhile, receives a call from Fuches, who at this point is super happy, but he has this nagging feeling. And this is, once again, bringing me back to my title, Forgiveness and Consequences. Fuchs destroyed his relationship with his mentor. He tried to have him murdered, and he thinks by calling Barry he can make it okay. And Barry basically tells him to go fuck himself, and that he's with Gene and nothing he did mattered. And Fuchs is trying to tell him like, "Dude, you killed the man's love interest. Do you think that just goes away? Like, you think you're gonna make this better? You can't." And they have a heated discussion and they hang up. And then later, uh, Barry, being pissed off about everything that's happened, decides to kill Fernando. Um, and uh, Fuchs is later highlighted that he is going to get revenge on Barry. And here's an interesting story. There's a lot more components to this, and like I said, if I went over every plot and every detail, this video would be like hours long. But the basic gist is through his, I guess, wife, person he's in love with, the girl he's staying with, he hears this story about vengeance. And instead of getting the meaning, and she even says, like, the meaning of the parable, he takes the exact opposite wrong meaning. And this is what I mean with everybody making poor decisions and consequences and shit stacking on each other. Because in this story, these spirits all have a chance to either seek forgiveness and go to heaven or seek vengeance and become like these wolves and be damned to hell. And so Fuchs gets the idea from the story that he's got to employ his own wolves and comes up with one of the most fucked up ways to get back at Barry. And that's kind of where we leave episode 3 off. And this is a good episode. Um, Once again, we're tackling the themes. We're getting slightly darker at this point, especially with the Fuchs storyline. And we're also starting to see a theme, which I'll touch on the last season, because it'll all pull it together. But these people all have points where they could be happy. They could legitimately let their beef go and just live their lives. But because of the connections and the ties that they have to each other, and in some way their selfishness, they wind up coming right back to this point of wanting to get even with each other and this cycle of violence, revenge, and not accepting responsibility. And I think, much like this show, every episode just really, that's why I love this show so much. It kind of flows and connects all of these themes, and every episode builds on each other. And you can see this slow, dreadful climb to where we're going to get to by the end of the season. And I really like that. I think it's sharp writing where every episode kind of just flows into each other, and you can see one thing building on the other thing until you get to your climax. And you could see in this episode the choices that are being made that's going to set up the rest of the fucked up plots in this. So we get to episode 4, All the Sauces. And this is titled that because of a comment that's made, but it's really mixing everything together, what happens. So Fuchs returns to the U.S. despite having a happy life, and he starts visiting the family members of the victims of all of Barry's killings from season 1 up till now. And he starts kind of playing a detective role and telling them who murdered their family and kind of leading them towards Barry. And that comes from the story he heard. He's gathering all these wolves in a hope that they'll all get together and kill him. It's brilliant and fucked up simultaneously. Meanwhile, Barry has no fucking idea about this. And so he's obliviously doing his thing. And he reaches out to Ryan, remember in the first season, his father, who gave the sad speech. And this is where they start bringing everything full circle, and you start to see these people you forgot about come back in a major way. Meanwhile, Barry places the Czechoslovakian's bomb in Crystal Ball's home to kill Fernando, his men, but the remote detonator fails. And this is the funny part I was getting to with the bomb app and the way No Hole Hank sets it up and everything. And then he realizes there's a problem, so he calls customer service to get his bomb app to work. It's fucking hilarious. And she's like, "Are you by the device?" He's like, "Yes." She's like, "Did you try turning it on and or turning it off and turning it back on again?" It's just a funny little fucking comedic side piece about him trying to get it, and then they reset it, and then the fucking house blows up. And it's just so hilarious the way it all plays out. Meanwhile, Cristobal was standing up to his father, who was going to torture him and murder him because he found out that he was with No Hole Hank helping him out. And so, uh, as he's getting ready to kill him, Barry detonates the bomb and inadvertently saves Cristobal while injuring him because Cristobal was kind of leaving. He like escaped and was running out, and Barry set off the bomb, which killed Fernando and everybody who was inside. So it was, uh, Barry didn't do it altruistically. It was a happy accident, and then he sees Cristobal wandering around. So Barry picks him up and he returns him to Hank because he knows uh, this is the person that he loves. So he wound up killing the Latins and saving NoHo Hank's lover. Meanwhile, Gene prepares to flee LA with his son Leo and his grandson, despite his agent saying that what happened with him and Barry actually sparked his career again. So we start to see people's careers getting off the ground, things like that. And he's like, I don't care. He's just thinking about the people around him. Meanwhile, Joplin premieres. Uh, which is Sally's biggest thing that's happening, but Barry misses it because of his job with Hank. And in the meantime, Katie, the the co-star with Sally, talks to her about the relationship and how she notices abusive tendencies with Barry. So when Barry um, gets there to the premiere, Sally breaks up with him because she realizes she is in fact falling into bad patterns. And meanwhile, Barry gives Gene the money that he received from Hank, and he promises to stay out of his life. And he's like, "You're not gonna come near me or nothing." He goes, "No." And this is the first selfless thing that Barry does, and I'd say that he does throughout the rest of the show, where he finally realizes he can't force change, and he lets Gene go and accepts his role in everything, and he gives him all the money that he got, which is 25,000 for the job. We'll get to that. Not only is that number important, but it does come back later. But he gives him the money and gets out. Meanwhile, uh, elsewhere, the widow Julia and her son Kyle purchase a firearm to kill Barry. So, if you remember in the first season, the first hit that Barry does with the guy dead in the bed, these are the people who this guy was married to. And this is what's important when I say this is about uh, the forgiveness and the consequences, because he's now facing the consequences of all of these hits. And that's going to be a running theme through most of these episodes. And so Sally and Kyle, who are, the wife and the son of this guy who they don't know why he got killed. It's hinted he's some kind of political figure that needed to be taken out. But Barry never questioned any of this. And this is sort of highlighting the victims and the people that he's left in the wake of his violence, and how no matter how much he wants to sweep this thing under the rug, he killed them. He needs to take responsibility for it, and it will come back. So, episode 5, entitled Crazy Time Shit Show, features Barry's fellow Marine, Albert, who is now in the FBI. And remember, I said Albert would come back later? This is him. So, he survived. And in Barry's story, he saved his life, and that actually happened. And now Albert became an FBI special agent who consults in police investigations, and he is consulting in the murder of Janice Moss. And he is figuring things out that the cops aren't, and kind of getting close, but not too close to Barry. Meanwhile, Barry asks for relationship advice from Hank and Crystal Ball, which is a funny little comedic scene, and they suggest that he express himself in a more sincere way to Sally. And in the meantime, Elena, Fernando's daughter and Crystal Ball's wife, arrives in LA. So this is where we get the Fernando and Crystal Ball love story, which I told you would become important. Fernando was married, and his wife does not know he's gay. And it's a big thing in Latin culture and stuff. You don't admit that stuff. You get married to a woman, and it kind of showing all of that. But it's also a kind of comedic plot line, because she actually loves him and is here to take him back. In the meantime, uh, uh, they raid the compound and they kidnap Crystal Ball, and Hank hides in the closet. Meanwhile, Gene attends a dinner party hosted by Joe Mandianga, who, if you've seen him, he's in CSI, Criminal Minds, and all of that. You'll recognize him. I think I butchered his last name, but he plays himself, and him and Gene, they patch things up because he sees Gene is different. And Gene starts apologizing to people and really wanting to better himself after having a brush with death. So he goes to Joe's party, and there's this person there named Annie, who used to be a theater director that Gene dated, but after they had problems in their relationship, he ruined her career and blackballed her. And this is where you see that Gene's kind of a piece of shit himself. But we're not talking on the level like he killed somebody. He killed her career. But he goes, fine, I'm going to make it better. And she doesn't believe Gene's change. She storms out of the dinner party. And meanwhile, Sally is devastated to learn that after dominating the homepage for 12 hours, her show Joplin was canceled from streaming platforms, which is the statement I was talking about, streaming and Hollywood and stuff. So her show was canceled because of the algorithm on the network's homepage, where it wasn't jiving with people. And this happens a lot with shows where like they're kind of weird, experimental, or they're true and they just don't hit. Maybe they hit later, maybe word of mouth, but at the time they aren't the big draws that the network thought they were going to be. So it doesn't even get aired. Even though she had this premiere, she had great reviews, the show gets canceled before it even starts. And uh, this show called Banshee takes over the spot, which is just the typical Medusa women who get revenge on these guys they date. It's really fucking stupid, and it's hilarious because it shows you what Hollywood prioritizes as best-selling, empowerment, and things like that. So it's a kind of cool little commentary on that. And meanwhile, Barry tries to console her in the only way he knows how, and tries to let her into his nature a little bit, and says, well, why don't you just torture the exec until she makes the show happen? And it's so fucking hilarious the way he says it. And in a way, it kind of shows Barry wants to change, and he wants to, but he's a fucking hitman, and no normal person would think that torturing someone was a great answer to getting their show back on. So it goes horribly fucking wrong. She gets pissed and kicks him out. And Barry's like, what the fuck? I showed myself. I don't understand. It's like, if I hide myself, no one understands me. If I show who I am, no one understands me. It's comedic and it's sad all at the same time. So as Barry leaves, Julie and Kyle prepare to kill him. And Julie and Kyle are the couple that I told you. They found out through Fuches that her husband and the son's father was killed by Barry. And this is a great commentary on revenge and on consequences, as I've been stating. And if you're going to kill someone, there may be consequences. So they go to shoot Barry, but they have an argument about who's going to shoot Barry. The mother wants to do it because she doesn't want the son living with that weight, and the son wants to do it because he knows his mother will be better and get past her grief. So they think. And while they're debating with this gun over who's going to kill them, the mother accidentally shoots her son in the stomach, and they wind up driving off. And ironically, Barry just sees them speed away after these gunshots and this argument. And he's just nods his head like this and walks away. It's something so powerful about scenes like that. And it's so, the way it's done and shot and the way it's played out is so subtle, but yet so much impact, and so much like you're sitting there going, holy shit, that just happened. And I think that's what gives Barry a lot of weight and depth in its show. It's little fucked up moments like that you watch and you go, wow, that's fucking crazy. So now we get to episode 6, 710 North. And this is another this is another episode that is super dark and also funny. It goes super dark towards the end. And so Fuches has been going around recruiting everybody, and he goes to this biker gang led by Tyler's sister. Remember Tyler? Super crazy. The sister, Tracy, hates Tyler, but she decides to go after Barry after finding out that he had gotten money for a hit that never got to them. So this gang doesn't really give a shit that she doesn't even care her brother got shot, but they all want the money. So one of the members shoots Fuches in the desert and leaves him for dead. Fuches is tended to by a family in Mexico, and Fuches is healed and everything else, but he's still going on his quest to bring down Barry. And he steals a truck and he contacts Moss's father, Jim, who will become a very important part from now until the end of the show. Meanwhile, Sally reluctantly accepts a writing job on the Banshee series, The New Medusas, which is supposed to be what Joplin was, but got swapped out. So they have her become a writer. And she hates this show, and it kind of shows like the difference in writing and how some writers are kind of pigs and really superficial, and they think dumb ideas are good, and it gets put on screen and people watch it. It's the meta commentary on the industry. In the meantime, Gene's agent offers him an opportunity to teach a masterclass course online, which will be a lot of money and a big boost for Gene's career. But in his effort to change, he gets in contact with Annie and he hires her and offers her all of the profits in a way to show his change and to say he's sorry. Meanwhile, Albert suggests someone with a military background was involved in the Fernando's assassination. Remember the bombing in the third episode, I believe, and decides to visit Chris, who was also a friend of Barry and Albert. So it's all coming full circle. Meanwhile, Chris's widow, Sharon, uh, invites Barry for dinner at night. And Barry is still in a weird place. He's trying to figure everything out. And on his way there, Barry is attacked by Tracy's biker gang. And this is where the funny shenanigans ensue. It's dark, but it's also hilarious, and it's a strong commentary on violence where this biker gang starts shooting at Barry. There's all of these guns going off, and hardly anybody notices. It's more inconvenient. These bikes are in the way. And um, it ends with the biker gang not even being killed by Barry, but them being killed by a random like store owner because Barry goes into a shop to try to escape. This girl parks the bike on the top, and the owner of the car dealership comes out and shoots her with a shotgun. So once again, it's kind of like the commentary on violence and how wacky and out of place it is. And then Barry goes over to visit Sharon, and he notices Fuchs' card on the table, and he realizes that Sharon knows what he did to Chris and has poisoned his food. And he starts to hover between life and death. And like I said, forgiveness, consequences. As you can see, this is about people. Are they willing to forgive Barry for his sins? And 2 out of the 3 so far, not so much. But the consequences that always come back on him. Albert wanting to find out what's going on. He was so close, but Sharon didn't say anything because she wanted to get to Barry herself, and she poisoned him. And this may be the consequences of Barry. So we start Barry off in episode 7, Candy Asses, where he flees the house after being poisoned and starts hallucinating on this beach. And this beach is a representation of life and death, I believe. It's up to your interpretation, but he sees everybody so far in the series that he's killed. And he's standing on this beach having a casual conversation with them where they're all ignoring him. And it's kind of a representation of how he's so casual about all of these people. And it's literally a beach filled with everyone he's ever killed. And they're all just waiting. And so he's hovering between a state of life and death. Meanwhile, as he's dying at this trash can, Ryan's father from episode 1, season 1, who knows Barry killed his son or has an idea, scoops up Barry, puts him in a car, and is taking him to a hospital. And this to me symbolizes that, yes, some people have a great capacity to forgive, and those people will find some kind of peace, whether it's forgiving yourself or forgiving a man who did something atrocious to you. And that's the worst. But he doesn't want to live with that. And he talks about how he thought about killing Barry and all this. But that's not him. That's not who he is. And so, meanwhile, he is So, meanwhile, Ryan's father, who considered killing Barry as revenge before ultimately committing suicide, considers Barry for getting revenge on Barry, but he commit and was thinking about committing suicide in the hospital driveway. Doesn't. Hank travels to Bolivia to find Crystal Ball, only to be captured alongside of a few Czechoslovakians. And Sally discovers her former assistant Natalie betrayed her and has become a showrunner at the Banshee Network and lashes out in a fit of rage and envy. Natalie films the encounter and posts it online, costing Sally her writing job. Sally later posts a non-apology video, which she defends her actions, and Lindsay drops Sally as a client when she launches into a tirade about her friend. Meanwhile, Fuches meets Jim Moss to discuss Barry's role in Janice's death, only to have Jim drive Fuches to the police station and have him arrested. Meanwhile, filming begins in Gene Cousineau's masterclass, although Annie struggles because of her decade-long absence from the film industry. After learning that Gene also accused Barry of killing Janice, Jim questions Gene, who unconvincingly covers for Barry, and Albert interrogates Fuches off camera, where Fuches admits to being Barry's handler and reveals that Barry is an assassin and his role in their friend Chris's death. And this is where everything comes to a head. So we have collision courses going on here. And let me just break that all down because we're get almost to the final climactic episode 8. But so Fuches is captured while trying to recruit Janice or Moss's father. And Moss's father is super intelligent. It's very vague, but they hint he was an interrogator for the CIA, and he puts 2 and 2 together and figures out that Fuches is a piece of shit, and basically walks him in the jail, and it's hilarious. But he also starts to piece everything together, and he goes to Gene Cousineau to find out more answers. In the meanwhile, Barry, hovering between life and death, Ryan's father saves him, which proves that people can be forgiven. And on top of that, Sally torpedoes her career. And this is what we're talking about, consequences, right? She becomes envious. She has a foothold in this company. She has 3 or 4 chances to just be happy with what she has, but instead she wants more. And like I said, selfish characters. And she's a selfish character too. And in her tirade and her envy towards a person who she's been friends with since their acting class, instead of being supportive and being there for her, she kind of is a bitch and treats her super horribly and doesn't congratulate her for her success and ends up losing everything. Meanwhile, Gene is actually the only one changing. He's got this job. He gives Annie a chance. She's doing well, and then Janice's father shows up, and he defends Barry for his own selfish reasons. Like, this is the opportunity he has. This man killed his lover, but hey, Tugamuse, what's up? But he defends him because he doesn't want to lose the opportunities he's just had, which shows the selfishness he has along with Barry. So we're to the climactic end, a phrase that Bill Hader's Barry always says: "Starting now," meaning starting now, he's not going to kill somebody else. So Barry leaves the hospital after his poisoning. And he finds Sally in his apartment. She's down and out. She needs him to console her, but she wants him to kill Natalie. And Barry actually does a non-selfish thing. He refuses and says that if she does it, she won't be able to live with herself. In the meantime, the motorcycle gang that he thought he got rid of, one of them come back. They knock out Barry and they attempt to kill Sally. Sally, in self-defense and partly rage, beats the motorcycle guy to death. And Barry tells Sally to go home. He will take the blame and he's going to clean everything up. Meanwhile, Fuches is in prison. Hank is forced to listen to his fellow Czechs being mauled to death by a panther, but he breaks out in a, again, comical yet kind of really super dark scene. And he breaks his shackles off, uses the guard's automatic weapon, kills the panther, and breaks his cell. Meanwhile, Elena, who captured Crystal Ball and is his legit wife, is using electroshock conversion therapy. And Hank kills Elena to rescue Crystal Ball, but is shaken by the events. Meanwhile, Albert and Barry finally meet as Barry is burying the biker's body in order to cover up what Sally did. And Barry and Albert have one of probably the best scenes in all of Barry, their conversation. And this is where Barry breaks. This is where he finally mentally snaps. And because Albert asked him, "How could you kill Chris? How could you kill a friend, a fellow vet?" He is like, this killing has to stop, and takes out his gun to shoot him, and Barry lets out this scream that's so chilling and just breaks down. And Albert looks at him and he says, "This has got to stop. This is your chance, your one and only chance." He goes, "Take this as an opportunity to walk away." And this is important because, like I said, forgiveness and consequences. He is freed. He's forgiven. They have Fuches. He could walk away. This is his one and only shot he's going to get to make things right. And so he says he's not going to kill anyone. But in a twist of epic twists, as Barry buries the body and Sally runs away from Los Angeles, unaware she is already traveling alone to Joplin, Jim Moss calls him and says that he spoke with Gene and asked to meet, but Barry refuses. And Gene calls him and says that they have to kill Moss. Barry pleads not to kill Moss himself, but Gene's going to do it. And so there's the final scene. Gene's there with a gun. Barry's like, "No, let me. I can't let you take this responsibility. I've already covered up one fucking body for the day. I got this." And, I just want to consider us even. And as he goes in to kill Jim, he's ambushed by the police. And it was all a setup. And Gene says, "Got you. you son of a bitch. He's like, I don't forgive you. And Barry's taken away to prison. And that is how we end season 3 of Barry. So, overall, what was it about? Well, you heard the lack of forgiveness and everything else, and also the consequences for actions. And forgiveness doesn't mean that you are absolved of your actions or that you don't face consequences for your actions. How does the saying go? Everybody's got to pay the piper eventually. And we start to see everybody's actions from Sally to Jean to Barry to Fuches and how they all lead them to the eventual consequences and downfall to some characters. And even NoHo Hank and Crystal Ball, everything comes full circles. All of the choices they made lead them to the most horrendous parts. But what the characters choose to do at that moment is the thing that either puts them on a path to healing or it puts them directly in line to the consequences that they should have received. Barry had like 4 fucking opportunities, including one by Albert, to walk away. And even though he was trying to help his friend Gene Crusoe by not killing this person, he set himself up and they knew he couldn't resist that. And he was caught by trying to help a friend instead of letting him face his own consequences because he thought he could be forgiven by this action. And he never was forgiven. Gene never forgave him. He never forgot about it. He always plotted to have him face the consequences for his actions, which he got through Jim Moss. So all the chickens come home to roost, so it appears. But my friends, we still have one more season and the eventual end of Barry, Fuches, Sally, Gene Cousineau, Jim, and NoHo Hank, Crystal Ball, everybody we've ever met. All of their futures will be tied and wrapped up in our next season review. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I enjoy doing these. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think? What would you like to know? Was there some things I left out? Some plot points you were interested in? Things like thoughts you have of the show overall? Also, tell me, what's your favorite show that you watch? What's your favorite crime drama, deep drama? Like some people like BoJack Horseman and things like that. Let me know what's your favorite dramedy, we'll call it. And also, what else would you like seeing covered here in the channel? I might also do Twin Peaks here as well. So let me know in the comments below. What do you think of these retrospectives? Would you like to see more? Are you getting enough? Is there anything I'm missing? Anything you'd like me to elaborate on? And as always, remember, there's only one rule here in the Phantom Zone. Kneel before Zod.